hear good news. We pray especially this day for our sisters and brothers throughout the north of our state, that they might find hope and encouragement this day, and that someday soon this fire will end. Lord, we are grateful for your grace through Christ our Lord. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. We're doing Acts 24 and 25 today. And
I thought before we had him just focused on the bigger.
Thank you. And what we're going to focus on today is a passage in 1 Peter 3:15 that says, and I paraphrase, that for Christians, it's important to be prepared to make a defense of the hope that is within you. A defense of the hope that is within you. And through 2,000 years of church history, that passage, the Greek word is apologia. Apologia means defense. That has morphed into 2,000 years of what is called Christian apologetics. I just finished a 400-page book on the history of Christian apologetics by Avery Cardinal Dulles, who used to be a Presbyterian. In fact, his father was John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State under Eisenhower. And Avery Dulles began as a Presbyterian, became an agnostic, and then had a conversion experience, and he became a Catholic. And then he's one of the few cardinals that's been appointed by the Pope to be a cardinal, even though he had never served as a bishop, because he's a cardinal that's sort of a writer, and he's sort of an apologist for the Catholic Church. Anyway, he's a very good writer, and I've read probably 5 or 6 of his books, but this one is 500 pages, 400, whatever, of history of how the Christian movement has called itself Christian and defended that position through 2,000 years. So what we're going to do is make reference to that book as we look at 24 and 25, because what is 24 and 25? It is Paul's defense twice, right? We're going to have one defense that he's going to do before Felix, who's the governor. Then he's going to do another defense before a second governor, Festus, and Agrippa and his sort of sister consort. It's kind of cloudy what the relationship was between Herod Agrippa II, and his Bernice. So we're not sure what they were about, but Paul makes a defense primarily to Agrippa. Okay, so that's the setup. So the first question before we get into this, and this is a kind of a meta question, is this: how in the world does Luke construct this story? I mean, let's stop for just a second. Morning, was it possible that Luke or whoever wrote Acts was in the room when Paul made his defense before first Felix and then later Festus and Agrippa? Or how did Luke or whoever learn of what Paul said? And more importantly, the conversations that happened between Festus and King Agrippa. Because as you see in this text, there's actually recorded a conversation between the governor, Festus, and Agrippa. Was there a Christian scribe there? Could y'all speak slower? I mean, here's my point. If you're a historian in the first century, whether you're a Christian, Jew, or pagan, what historians did typically is they constructed what they thought would have been a plausible conversation or would have been a plausible speech based on what they knew of the characters, etc. Y'all see what I'm saying? And that was considered good history. Now, in our time, if historian says, I'm going to construct a speech that would have been plausible, or a conversation that would have been plausible, that in our lingo would be hearsay. Right, lawyers? I'm looking at the lawyers today. Okay. I mean, if you said, I heard that somebody said that somebody reported that's called hearsay, right? And it's not well attested in court findings because everybody's going to object, right? But in historical writing in the first century, that was considered okay. So what Luke is doing is based on what he knew about what Paul would have said and what Festus and Agrippa would have said, we get this story. And it's fascinating. Think of it more in a way as a really good playwright writing what a scene would look like.
Okay.
That makes sense? Because I don't think we can find eyewitness testimony. I bet Lane has a point about that. Lane's gonna say, you're right, Frank, and then some.
Frank, you're right.
And then some. Okay.
And then some.
Thank you. Thank you. You're a great audience. You're a great audience. Okay. All right. So in chapter 20, where are we? 20. We're doing 26. Yeah, 24 and 25. Right. Now, while we're doing, wait. Let me look at my list here. So make sure, because I've studied all of these. Okay, it's 25 and 26 that we're doing today. 25, right?
Yes.
25 and 26. Okay. Now, all right. So he's already defended himself in 24 with Felix, who was the previous governor, right? And then the new kid in town shows up, and that's Festus. So let me read just a little bit of 25. 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews gave him a report against Paul. They appealed to him and requested as a favor to them against Paul to have him transferred to Jerusalem. They were, in fact, planning an ambush to kill him along the way. Y'all remember this? It's already happened before. So this is the second attempted ambush of Paul. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So he said, let those of you who have the authority come down with me, and if there's anything about this man, let him accuse him. And after he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. The next day, he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he arrived, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem surrounded him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. And Paul said in his defense, the Greek there is apologia. He said in his defense, I have in no way committed an offense against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against the emperor. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, asked Paul, do you wish to go to Jerusalem and be tried there before me on these charges? And Paul said, I am appealing to the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know. Now I am in the wrong. Now, if I'm in the wrong, and if I committed something for which I deserve death, I am not trying to escape death. But if there's nothing to their charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. I appeal to the emperor. Then Festus, after he had conferred with his council, replied, you have appealed to the emperor you will go. I appeal to the emperor. Now, N.T. Wright makes a point that when we use the word appeal, it usually means there's been a trial that people object to, and then they're going to apply to a higher court, right? Well, in this case, the appeal has happened before there's been a formal trial. And he's saying, I want to be tried in Rome. Now, you remember that Paul earlier in Acts has had a couple of visions of Jesus where Jesus says, don't be afraid, you're going to go to Rome. Now, I suspect that when Paul heard that first, he thought, I'll go under my own power. Well, he will go to Rome, but he'll go as a prisoner, right? So Paul appeals to the emperor that his case be judged there. Why? Did Paul have a sense that if he went back to Jerusalem, that they might try to ambush him again? I mean, why not? They've already tried it once, right? Wouldn't they do it again? So Paul senses not only the physical danger of going from Caesarea to Jerusalem, but also realizing once he got there, he's already had a hearing before the Sanhedrin. And remember, it almost erupted into a riot because he said, I'm here on account of the resurrection. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees started going, you remember? And they had to literally rescue him out of that, the Sanhedrin. But remember, that's the same Sanhedrin that convicted Jesus. And they had basically thrown Peter and John in jail. This is not a fair court, right? This is a very difficult place. So Paul says, no, I'm not going to Jerusalem. I appeal to Caesar. And next week, we'll get the story of his going to Rome. Okay, so that will happen, right? Well, here's the deal. Paul is an accused Jewish Christian of doing things against the law of Moses, against the temple, and then he raises a third one in here, against the emperor. So it's not only religious crimes he's accused of, but he's also accused of a political crime. And by the way, this is the first time in Paul's defense that he's raised the issue of, have I done something against the emperor? You know, and he said, I haven't done anything against any of these people, right? So his defense is kind of simple. It goes like this: I'm innocent of all charges. Yeah. And furthermore, that you have to have accusers in the Roman setting face to face. And by the way, isn't that probably the biggest takeaway American jurisprudence has from Rome? That you get to face your accuser. Wouldn't you say that's probably the most direct carryover part from Rome? And I would say it's one of the great gifts of Roman jurisprudence to us, that we have a right to face our accusers. And that's what Paul said. All these accusers are giving contradictory testimony. I didn't go in the temple to stir up a riot. They stirred up a riot when they saw me. I haven't tried to undermine the law. Remember, Paul has this dual view of the law of Moses. On the one hand, if you're a Jew and you convert to Christianity or become a Jewish Christian, you can continue to follow the law. I mean, that's not a problem. If you want to circumcise your baby, eat kosher food, and worship the Lord on Sabbath, that's fine. Here's the problem. If you're a Gentile, those are the kind of things you cannot impose upon Gentile converts. And so where Paul talks about the law coming to an end is on those kinds of issues that, quote, make you a Jew in the public world. If you worship on the Sabbath, don't work. If you circumcise your baby and you eat kosher food, to all the world, you're what? You're Jewish. It's public testimony. And Paul's saying you do not have to do those kinds of things in the law in order to become a Christian. But as I've said a million times, and I'll keep saying it, there was much in the law that Paul was completely comfortable Christians obeying. For instance, tell me which one of the 10 Commandments Paul says is optional. One, Sabbath. Sabbath, observance is the only one of the 10 Commandments that Paul says that's optional. Because what? The early Christians started worshiping the Lord on Sunday instead of Saturday, right? So it was one. Everything else in the 10 Commandments is eternally valid as far as Paul's concerned, right? Think about it. The first 3 are really about idolatry. Don't make any graven image, no other gods, don't use the Lord's name. The 4th one is Sabbath, and that was optional. The 5th one is honor your parents. Next one is murder, adultery, theft, stealing, and envy. Those are perfectly legitimate. So it's a huge mistake to say that Paul, quote, jettisoned the law of Moses. That's simply not true. It's that part of the law that says you've got to become a Jew first before you become a Christian. And by the way, by the year 70, about a third of the law of Moses becomes moot. Why? No temple. There's no sacrifices, there's no high priest, there's no animals. A third of the law is to this day moot because there's no temple, right? 613 laws. A third of it is about the temple and all that. A lot of people get confused about that because Paul will say in Romans 10:4 that Christ is the end of the law. Well, it's the end of the law in terms of you've got to become a Jew first before you can become a Christian. That's what has come to an end in Christ. Mhm.
One of my aunts was a Seventh-day Adventist, and if memory serves me, they did follow
Yes.
the Jewish.
Yes.
I know she went to church on Saturday,
Right.
but wasn't all of the, I mean, I'd seen like the dietary stuff.
Yes. In the Seventh-day Adventists, you do worship on Sabbath
Right,
and you do follow the dietary laws.
right.
And
okay.
I'm pretty sure they do circumcision in the Seventh-day
I
Adventist.
never asked for that.
Yeah, I've never asked, you know, but I'm assuming logically that's what would follow.
Okay.
So did we just change it and decide to call Sunday the Sabbath?
Well, what started happening was Gentiles had no connection to Sabbath. So when Paul converts Gentiles, he says, let's remember the risen Christ on Sunday. You know, and so that became the practice. Now, if you were a Jewish Christian, I suspect that you were worshiping God on both days. I suspect that was happening.
Or all week?
Or all week, yeah, right. All right, so the defense Paul makes here is that he has not broken the law of Moses, he has not defamed the temple, and he has not done anything to undermine Caesar. And that's his defense. He's told, well, we're going to send you back to Jerusalem to defend yourself. Paul says, no way. Probably there's going to be some people trying to kill me on the way. And once I get there, it will not be a fair trial. So I appeal to Caesar. And look, Festus does what a governor is supposed to do. If you seriously appeal to Caesar and you're a Roman citizen, which Paul is, to Rome you go. So here's a little so what about this. Let's suppose we're caught in a situation where we're drug into court. You know, Paul's model would be that it's quite fair to argue for your rights as a Roman citizen. I would say it's quite fair to argue for our rights as American citizens. I mean, to me, that seemed like an obvious sort of correlation, right? So you don't just drop your rights when you're falsely accused, you know, so I'm trying to argue that Paul has a lot of chutzpah. And he says, finally, look, I'm done with this Sanhedrin thing. I appeal to Caesar. That's pretty cool. That's a significant moment. And by the way, what is Luke saying by that? He's basically saying, strangely enough, that pagan law courts might give Christians a better hearing than a prejudiced religious court. Think about that. Now, I have two lawyers here, so I'm so glad I can ask them. When people in legal situations think about going to court, isn't the first thing they think about is, well, who's the judge? Right? You know. Yeah.
Yeah, change of venue is.
Change of venue.
important,
You would
right?
change of venue. And if you know that this judge is very prejudiced against X, and your case is about X, it's time for a change of venue, right? So I think what Paul is saying is sometimes you have to even appeal to the inherent, hopefully the justice in even a pagan law court. Now, this is interesting because in 1 Corinthians 6, when he had some Gentile Christians arguing with each other and they go to pagan law courts, he says, don't do that. Let people within the congregation judge your disputes. Remember that? But this is a different kettle of fish. This is Paul's life is on the line. And so he appeals to Rome. And by the way, what we're going to get now, the rest of these 2 chapters, is probably what Luke would have imagined was Paul's defense when he did get to Rome. Because as you know, we don't get Paul's defense in Rome. This is probably what he would have done. That's a long excursus, but is everybody kind of with me on this? I mean, our comments or thoughts about this?
Share something.
Yeah,
When we lived in Delaware, and I was on the session, I went to a Presbytery meeting, and there was a corporation that brought a dispute to Presbytery to be decided. It was a labor dispute between the owner, who was Presbyterian, and a number of his employees. And they brought their dispute before the Presbytery. It was a little weird. It was
Really?
Really, I was very surprised. They brought from another Presbytery, they were like from South Carolina or somewhere. And they brought it's a pickle factory. And they brought their dispute before the Presbytery, and we heard them, and they had agreed they were divided by
so the Presbyterian rendered a judgment.
the Presbytery.
Oh my gosh,
It was pretty interesting. I have never heard anything.
oh my gosh.
It's the first time I've heard.
I never heard that.
I think it was my first Presbyterian meeting.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. Well, this should be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That gives you a very good idea of the change in law
Yeah, oh, yeah, definitely.
from 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was kind of I don't know, it's curious. That was an early cultural sensitivity declaration by Paul.
Absolutely.
I mean, especially historically, I mean,
Yeah,
people stuck to their little
Yeah.
groups and
that's right.
and it was interesting. But with Rome being such a large empire, right, it had to accept all kinds of different stuff. So
Yeah. Well, here's what I've been thinking about. And I don't want to go too deep into the weeds here, but all week long in our country, there's been a lot of discussion about the Supreme Court and how this leak has affected not only the court, but people's view of the court, and the internal. I saw where Clarence Thomas suggested that now people are going to start looking over their shoulders when they're having, quote, private deliberations, in the Supreme Court. But the larger question is, in our country, the Supreme Court, because of Justice Marshall a long time ago, is supposedly to adjudicate our disputes, right? Our final legal disputes. And I got to thinking about Paul. Did he think by appealing to Rome, he would get better justice in a pagan court than he would in a religious court? Well, the answer is yes, And now I'm thinking to myself, how do we as Christians in a really divided society over a very sensitive issue, abortion rights and all the rest, how do we now look at our highest court that ostensibly is going to make a decision on this, And furthermore, we know from the history of the Supreme Court, a lot of contentious issues in recent years have been decided 5-4, very narrow votes, And I guess this is kind of a reflection a little bit, but how is it we look at our secular court, our highest court? Because I'm not saying that it's a pagan court like, Rome, but it is ostensibly what? A secular court, right? Supposedly, right?
Theoretically.
Yeah. But now, because of the appointments that have been made recently, it's shifted, right? And so I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried about can a Supreme Court decision, can it bring us together? Will it further alienate us? Will it further divide? This is kind of a so what from this, but are y'all worried? I'm also worried, honestly, about assassinations. I'm worried about someone getting so angry about a particular decision that, a judge might be killed, a justice might be killed. And I think, looking at history, when democracies start to unravel, it's mainly evidenced by assassinations. It's assassinations that lead to, the destruction of a democracy by and large. So I don't know, I'm just throwing out a lot of different ideas here, but I can't help but bring up that Paul appeals to Rome, hoping to get justice. When we think of our Supreme Court, what do we think of? What is it? Just simply another political body like the House or the Senate, that sort of thing? Or is it supposedly a place where justice is rendered?
Supposedly, a
Supposedly.
place of justice. But five of those justices all said, we got precedent here. I'm going to pay attention to those precedents, and they're all five that signed,
Yeah, right.
signed the leak, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, what was it?
The Supreme Court justices are appointed for life.
Yeah,
And with people living into their 80s and 90s and 100s, 200s, and all that other good stuff, sometimes the body and the mind don't age, depending on one or the other.
that's right, yeah.
I understand that one of the judges, the last 10 or so years of his serving, he slept through most of the court hearings.
Slept though.
I mean,
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
there should be an end to their term. They
So-
should not be appointed for life, for one thing.
Term limits, yeah.
Well, I think the Congress should have something.
Yeah.
That's the side.
By the way, I've
And
argued,
retirements too.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've argued in the past that all office holders should have term limits, regardless of which. I mean, we already had that for president and vice president, right? I mean, that's a done deal. I think part of our logjam in our country is that we have some people in the House and Senate who sort of serve life terms, and certainly Supreme Court justices. I could argue that 21 years is plenty for anybody to be in public life. 21 years, thank you very much for your service, salute you, give you a flag, let you go away, But we have this problem of unlimited service. I think it's a problem. Should justices kind of say, look, I'm going to do 20 good years, I'm going to be appointed, say when I'm 45, and I'm gonna get out of here when I'm 66, and we'll go, thank you for your service. I would be all for that. What do my lawyers think?
Yes.
It's a question.
Yeah.
It's just pulling it off. That's what it must be.
Right, yeah.
When we were in Pennsylvania, the judges were elected for a 10-year term.
Oh,
Trial judges.
right.
They could run for retention, which was another 10-year term. Most of them didn't run again after that, which is good.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I think after they served their first 10 years, they could retire and receive a pension. There's really no reason to stay on forever.
I'm completely in agreement.
And most of them that I knew of did 20 years.
21 years. By the way, when I say 21 years, what I'm thinking of is, well, even 24 years. Senators serve for 6 years, right?
Yeah.
So let's let them go 24 years. Thanks them very much. God bless you, or 20 years, my point is, in the Presbyterian Church, here's a little polity quiz. Are you ready? Polity quiz 101. What's the only position in the Presbyterian Church, that does not have term limits? Dun, 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 dun.
Trustee.
Huh?
Trustee.
No.
Membership.
Pardon?
Well, maybe the
Pastors,
Yeah.
except if you're called to a designated term. The pastor is the only position that does not have a designated term. Elders, deacons, trustees, people in presbytery, synod, general assembly, everybody. So I have argued that why not have pastors have term limits? Like say, I'm gonna go back to my magic phrase, 21 years. I've been on the commission on the ministry a long time, and long pastorates, more or less, are considered positive for a congregation. And sometimes more, sometimes less. But here's what I'll tell you. The problem for the commission on the ministry is coming into a church after someone has served 21 years. The wake of that boat is pretty wide, right? And most of the time, the people who come in after that are what are called unintended interims.
Are you thinking 21 years in one church? Or
That's what I'm
21
saying.
years in
Max, after 21 years, goodbye, thank you for your
Could
service.
you go to another church?
Well, sure, why not, you know?
But you don't have to retire.
You don't have to retire.
So you're not looking to retire.
Yeah.
And some of them never do.
Yeah.
Some of them never retire.
Okay, so we've gotten off of policy, but y'all get the idea. The problem here is that Carol, we're talking about Paul appealing to Caesar.
Oh, okay.
And then from that, we're talking about what does it mean in our setting to have a Supreme Court, you know, sort of like that in some ways. Not that it's identical, but then the question becomes, who are these judges and who are these leaders in churches? And honestly, I think having a turnover, even after 21 years, to me, I would argue that, by the way. Okay, that's my little speech. Thank you very much. Y'all been a kind audience. Okay. Now, what happens here is in 25, the new kid in town is Festus. By the way, does this sound like a cowboy western or something?
I was wondering where that name came from.
I'm just gonna give him one bullet, you know. Anyway, is that Marty? Oh, I'm confused. Okay. So Festus comes to town, and Agrippa and his sister consort, whatever, Bernice, come to greet him. And while they're greeting each other, because remember, Herod Agrippa II is the son of Herod Agrippa I, who in Acts 12 beheaded James, the apostle. So his dad is, and also remember, he blows up in public, remember, well, or something happened to him. It was not pretty. Anyway, I think worms is what Acts says. Anyway, so his dad has had a demise, but now he's a very popular guy. And the Romans use these local aristocracy, right? And so Bernice and Agrippa come, and Festus fesses up that he doesn't know what to do with Paul. That Paul is this carryover prisoner for Felix. And he says, could you help me sort of figure out what I'm going to write on the charge against this prisoner? Because he's appealed to Rome, and I have no idea what the deal is. And Festus and Agrippa say, oh, that'd be great. I'd love to hear it. So chapter 26 is Paul's defense before Festus, Agrippa, and Bernice. But what happens is Paul is going to address his defense, strangely enough, to Agrippa, which is very interesting. Agrippa sort of knows the Jewish world, right? And so Paul addresses him, and the defense goes like this. It's twofold. It's very simple. He says, Agrippa, I know that you know the prophets. When he says prophets, he's probably referring to Ezekiel and Daniel. But he says, I know that you understand the prophets. And the prophets hope for a resurrection. Because remember, I'm a Pharisee, and that's the way I read the prophets. I interpret it to mean the resurrection. And I know that you believe in the prophets. Oh, and why should it be considered irrational that God would raise someone from the dead? And oh, by the way, I have seen the firstborn from the dead. I have seen Jesus of Nazareth. He appeared to me and gave me this commission. How can I resist this vision? So the argument or the defense is twofold. Our Jewish tradition, at least the part I follow, the Pharisaic version, says that we hope that God will resurrect the dead. Ezekiel 37, Daniel 12, and other stuff. I know you believe that, Agrippa. Oh, and by the way, it's been verified to me personally because I have seen the risen Christ who had to suffer, etc. That's his defense. So think about it. the first thing he does is say, I'm really being charged, strangely enough, because I believe in something in the Jewish tradition. Think about that. Isn't that a clever defense? You're charging me against the law and against the temple when I believe in something core in the Jewish tradition, that God raises the dead. Oh, and by the way, I can prove this to you because I've experienced it. So in apologetics, these are two different kinds of defenses, right? One is I'm appealing to the best in my own tradition. I'm appealing to my religious convictions that I had before I became a Christian. When I was a Pharisee, I believed this, right? I trusted that. Now, it's not just something in the hope, but I've seen it firsthand. I call that the Damascus Road defense. Now, here's why this is important. If I make a claim that, let me just see, let me do something ridiculous, okay? So you'll get my point. If I say that Mickey Mantle appeared to me from the dead and said, Frank, wear number 7 and hit home runs, I would say, you would say, Frank is delusional. Right? Wouldn't you? I hope every one of you. Can I get an amen? I mean, it's so delusional on every level. Okay. But if I say to y'all, I believe that my Jewish tradition affirms the resurrection of the dead, and then I can attest to it because I've personally seen it. You see how much different that argument is? One's just Mickey Mantle. He's nuts, right? And the other says, no, this is growing out of my religious core convictions, right? So this is a brilliant defense when you think about it. N.T. Wright goes on and on about what a brilliant defense it is. Paul is not saying, I am jettisoning my Jewish tradition. He said, I'm affirming my Jewish tradition. And now this Jesus who has been crucified is risen. Now there's a little step here that's not stressed in this speech, and it goes like this. The stumbling block to saying that Jesus is the Messiah is, oh, by the way, the Romans killed him. So he doesn't stress that before Festus. Oh, by the way, Festus, one of your other governors, yeah, Pilate, yeah, that guy. Yeah, he was the one. He doesn't go into Pilate. Do you notice that? That would be very important to note to your case manager. Don't mention Pilate. But what he does mention is the Jewish tradition. What do you think about it? Remember what Aristotle said? First thing about a speech, know your audience. Know your audience, right? Is that a brilliant speech or what? What do you think?
Yep.
Huh?
The only way to connect with someone is to know where they are so you can connect.
And he had witnesses all around when he had his vision of Mickey Mouse. Or
Yeah. Now remember, he doesn't call on anybody who was with him.
Right.
And so the problem about his experience is that, there's nobody there to verify it. Right.
Not in the court.
Not in the courtroom. So this is the problem with what I call the Damascus Road defense is, oh, let's see. Paul will later say that he was called up into the third heaven and he had a vision of heaven. Well, that's a pretty strong claim, right? Who could have seen it? So here's what I would suggest we think about for a second. Sometimes when we make a defense of our faith, if you're ever called upon to do this, and you say to someone, or I say to someone, I'll tell you accurately what I would say is, I had an experience in high school that changed me. It did. And I'm not going to go into all of it. It's too long and complicated. But here's the problem. Not any of you were there when I was in high school. But none of you saw what I was before or after. By the way, whenever I go to my high school reunions, they keep wondering, what? Anyway.
Who is this?
Yeah, right. No, they say, who are you kidding? No, that's what they say. But my point is, when we use only the Damascus Road defense, let's remember what you're really saying is, well, you really had to be there. You actually had to be there. But what if nobody was there, right? What is the evidence that something like that has happened? Well, the evidence that Paul gives here is that he says, I was not disobedient to that vision. And ever since I had that vision of the risen Christ, I've been going all over the Mediterranean world telling people about it, and I've suffered a lot, and here I am now in change. And this is one of Paul's, or Luke's only attempt, one of the few attempts at humor in Acts, where he says, listen, I would wish that every one of you were just like me. Well, of course, except for the change, which is a great moment. I laugh out loud every time I read that. Anyway.
But
It's not,
it was such a reversal of personality.
yes,
That's one thing, and the other thing is that Agrippa doesn't support his faith in his Jewish religion,
right.
and he's denying his own faith.
exactly. He puts Agrippa sort of on notice.
Yeah.
Now, he does say, look, before I had this encounter in Damascus, I was actually arresting Jewish Christians, So one of the evidences of this is I changed my tune completely and my behavior. And people can attest to that. That one you can easily attest to, right? So at the end of this speech, it's so interesting. Festus has been sitting there. Listen, he's a pagan. Who knows what his religious beliefs are? But let's be sure of one thing. He's not Jewish, right? And he's not a Christian. And what is Festus's response to Paul's notion? You're out of your mind. You are crazy. And the reason I think he does that is that he does not buy the Jewish tradition, because that was the appeal to Agrippa, right? The best of my Jewish tradition says, Ezekiel 37, the valley of dry bones, air will blow across them, God's spirit, they'll stand. Daniel 12, that God will resurrect, etc. That's what I'm arguing for. Well, Festus doesn't believe that. So when Paul talks about someone coming back from the dead, who's been, by the way, crucified by our guys, and I had seen him on the road, then it sounds like Mickey Mouse.
But wasn't it true that the Jews had sort of a preferred status in the Roman Empire? So why couldn't saying this is part of being Jewish?
Well, he doesn't use that, yeah.
Into the preferred status?
Well, the preferred
Festus
status,
is gonna be like, I may not believe it, but they
Right.
do have preferred status.
about the only part of that preferred status that's relevant here is that the Jews were allowed to pray for Caesar, not to Caesar.
Okay.
That was the preferred status. They also didn't have to serve in the Roman armies for a simple reason. They always said, listen, I'm sorry, it's Sabbath, we don't fight. And Roman soldiers said, what? We got a battle here. It's Saturday. What's the deal? Blaine, you got a comment there, sir?
Not really.
Not really. Okay. So here's what I'm saying. When Festus hears this, it's Mickey Mantle appeared to me. And he's crazy, right? And what's so great after this speech is Paul directly appeals to Agrippa. He says, I know that you believe the prophets, right? He doesn't say, I know you believe that Jesus appeared to me. He says, I know you believe the prophets. And Agrippa hears him and he says, oh, how soon you think to make me a Christian? And by the way, if you grew up in a evangelical church like I did, you always sang this hymn all the time, almost persuaded. Almost thou persuadest me is what the King James Version says of Agrippa. Almost thou persuadest me. So you sing almost, y'all know that hymn, Almost Persuaded? Terry does.
Probably.
Yeah, Terry knows it. If you grew up in the evangelical church, you know. Okay. So at the end of this encounter, after Paul has made his speech and tells Agrippa, look, you surely you understand this. Then it's great. Verse 30 is what I would call dramatic art form, Luke the storyteller. Then, this is verse 30. Then the king got up, and with him the governor and Bernice and those who had been seated with him. And as they were leaving, think about this, as they were leaving, they said to one another, who's listening? This man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment, Agrippa said to Festus. This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. Who was overhearing that conversation is what I want to know. Or is this the way Luke would have plausibly said that Agrippa would respond to this, right? Or is the larger issue here that whenever Christians are brought in front of courtroom settings in Acts, they are always considered innocent. Always. There's not a single courtroom setting where they, well, yeah, this guy should get 6 years to life, Not once. They're always vindicated every time. Now that's Luke's way of saying we're not a threat. We're not going to undermine the Caesar, and we're not actually trying to destroy the temple or the law of Moses. We're confessing what we think is core beliefs of the Jewish tradition, that God raises the dead. That's their defense. Oh boy. So if you were to make your defense of your Christian faith, just think about this for a minute. If someone asks you, well, what is this Christian thing you're doing? Why, what would you do? What would you say? How would you handle such a question? Really, don't everybody talk at once. Really, one at a time.
Have the Bible.
Yeah.
Well, most of the major religions have the similar set of rules, be good to your neighbors.
Oh, and the ethics, yeah, sure.
All that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But this is the only one that puts the onus on you, whether you do it or not.
Mhm.
Most of I understand most of the Islams converted because if they didn't, they lost their head. That's insane.
It may be in the first couple of years, yeah. It's a little different now.
You sure?
Oh, well, the Muslim experiences I've had would say it's different now.
Well, you're not in the war zones either.
That's true, yeah. Well, I'm not living in Afghanistan. I'm not a woman. I'm not wearing a burqa. So, I get it, yeah. To me, honestly, part of the issue here is how can we talk about our personal experiences, whatever they have been in the Christian life, that will not make us sound like Mickey Mantle appeared to me, you know what I mean? That is to say, plausible, not just sheer rationality, 1 + 2 = 2, you should know that. But there is a mystical element in some ways of the Christian tradition that it's hard to explain. And if I tried to explain to you in detail with 2 minutes to go to class what happened to me when I was in high school, it's a much longer story. It has a lot of ins and outs about it. But somehow our personal experience, if that's what is going to be our defense, how can we tell that story without it sounding like Mickey Mantle appeared to me? You know what I mean?
I think in the cynicism of today, it's really hard to make it up. Unless someone wants to believe, they're not going to.
Right.
Listen.
And let's remember, Paul may be one of the greatest apologists, for the Christian faith ever. And what does he get? He gets Festus saying, oh, well, you think I'm going to jump into the Christian faith? And Festus says, you're out of your mind. So the truth be told, this defense doesn't work. That's kind of the reality we face sometimes, Jesus ends a lot of his parables like this. Those with ears to hear, let them hear. right? So there is a mystery of, and Jesus talks about that seed that's put into the ground, it's a mystery which one of those grow, you know what I mean? But you just keep spreading seeds and you just keep telling the story, and sometimes it's convincing for mysterious reasons. And it's not you that did it, it's the Spirit of God, I think, that creates that possibility. So Paul, here's the big takeaway, y'all. The big takeaway is that when Paul is arguing for his life, he appeals to a pagan law court. That's the first point. And the second point is he appeals to his Jewish tradition, the best in the Jewish tradition. It says, I am attending to that and believing that. And now I've got proof in my own life that it's true. And nobody was there, you had to be there. But here's what I believe. And the net result is Festus keeps him in jail. He thinks he's mad. He sends him to Rome, and Agrippa walks away. He's not a Christian. And so it goes. Right? So let's don't think that just because Paul's a magical speaker, that it's presto, boom, or y'all know that phrase, Alakazam Abraham, boom. I mean, Christian witness is not like having Harry Potter's little sword. Boom, it's a little different than Harry Potter, right? All right, so next week, what we're going to do is have a heck of an adventure story. We're going to have a ship story, and then we're going to get to Rome finally. So next week, we'll do 27, 28, and we'll wrap up this long journey. Remember how Acts 1:8 says, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world. And what we're going to get next week is the uttermost parts of the world. Rome, because all roads lead to Rome, right? All right, let's.
Do you know what our next study?
Yeah, our next study will begin in 2 weeks. It'll be the second part of how Jesus became God, that video series. And we'll talk to you about that, John. Later. Okay.
You'll be getting information from me probably next week.
Okay.
A syllabus, for instance, so you know what the whole summer is going to look like.
Okay. Thank you, John. Okay, well, God bless, and go out there and tell the truth. Bear witness, okay?
All right.
God bless.
And by the way, it was Mount Olive, which is a big national company.
Now, all the paper.
Mount Olive.